Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 9 of season 6. Sam and I had a recent discussion around monitoring OAuth apps using Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, MDA. OAuth apps are used in Entra ID to authenticate and possibly give access to data in Microsoft 365. Here are a few things we covered. What are OAuth apps? What is Defender for Cloud Apps? How can Defender for Cloud Apps help review consented OAuth apps? And what policies can you deploy?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. All good, thank you.
Cool. It's MVP Summit week, so up late watching from afar because I didn't go this year.
Yes, I've started to see lots of selfies of people on planes and
Yes.
yeah, definitely.
The swag MV now.
Do you have like proper, FOMO? You're like, well, no. And to be fair, actually, you did call it perfectly with your house move, right? And everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's right call. It was the right call.
Yeah, we've been absolutely, well, I think I would have been frowned upon by the other half, I think.
Could you imagine it? Like, yeah, see you later. I'm off to hang with my MVP buddies, and if you could just get the house moved, that would be great.
Just empty it, yeah.
That's brilliant. It does look. The thing is, it looks like that. That Microsoft put on a really good, event for MVPs, and it looks like there's a lot of, Microsoft representation obviously there as well. In and around that community. So yeah, I bet you it's good. But you can dial in remotely, can you?
Yeah, to most sessions. There are a few that I can't get in, that I can't see because they've been what they called. They're basically extra ones. They're on site basically.
Okay.
So there's no way of recording it and things like that.
Okay, nice. Excellent. What are we covering this week, Alan?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about monitoring, reviewing, and securing OAuth apps in Entra ID using Defender for Cloud Apps. I think it's one of the new areas that, or I guess the hidden areas, not hidden, but unknown areas within Defender for Cloud Apps that a lot of it feels like a lot of customers don't realize is there and the value that it can bring. So hopefully we can highlight that and help secure organizations and their OAuth apps.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, because I don't know. Is it just me, or is the big sort of viewpoint of people that Defender for Cloud Apps is just sort of CASB?
Yeah. I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's because its origin was a CASB solution brought in kind of thing, and I suppose OAuth apps or that side of it has been kind of there a little bit, but it's not been the main focus. It's always been CASB side of it. So
okay, cool. Right. So do you want to just start us off by sort of explaining what OAuth apps are and sort of why they're important?
Yeah, sure. So OAuth apps. To be fair, OAuth apps are probably used everywhere and anywhere now today, and in effect, they're an open standard protocol for authentication, and OAuth it being open authorization. And in effect, it's allowing access to services without actually sending a password. So it's when you're using an identity provider like Entra ID, you can do that as a method, as an OAuth authentication against an app, a SaaS app, things like that, or other services to to gain to basically prove who you are and then gain access. Now, when I talk about OAuth apps in Enter ID, or other identity providers, it's the idea that you can use Enter ID to authenticate against maybe an internal app or against like I said, kind of other SaaS applications, but in effect you consent to allow it to gain information about you as an individual person. So that could be just your name and your username, so it can authenticate you into the application. But it might also be to authenticate to have access to Office 365, to Microsoft 365. Access to your email, access to SharePoint, to be able to might just be a backup system to be able to back up stuff. Might be so that it can a Gen AI can summarize your emails if you're not using Copilot, so it's got access to it. So that kind of thing. So what tend to happen, I'm going to say like 4 years ago, is that anyone could consent to an application, which meant that they could potentially gain access to, or one, authenticate as your user within an application, but two, depending on what roles it had or privileges, that would then allow access to various things that might be in 365 or within Enter or Microsoft from that side of things. So that's why they're sort of important in that sense, and that they are useful in sense of giving access to the right things, but kind of the risk is that we're seeing new attacks, or not to say new now, but in the last couple of years, where applications have been faked to gain access to data. So whilst they're useful, they're now being what's the word for it? I can't think of the word of it now. My mind's gone blank. But exploited in that way to be able to gain access. Pretend to be Microsoft 365, pretend to be a well-known SaaS application to allow you to consent to access to their email, to their files, kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose with the flexibility these OAuth apps now give us, is that the challenge? Controlling them now. Is the default that like a user can, out of the box, can a user consent to, to giving like their profile information to a third party app?
Yeah, originally it was, yes, until I'm going to say 1 or 2 years ago, where you're able to then lock it down and do admin consent, in that a user could be prompted to consent to an application, and then you can now require an admin to approve it, basically. So now there's more control. But probably over the last 1 to 2 years, organizations have started to turn that on. So previously you had some organizations have 300-400 OAuth applications, maybe more. Quite a lot of those probably legitimate out there, because there's a lot of sort of integrations and things like that. But a lot of them might be just been done, and you in the Enter ID portal it can be quite difficult to understand what, without going through them individually, or maybe running a PowerShell script. It's very difficult to get a list out, basically, of what permissions each app has and maybe what users are using it as well. Potentially you can see who's consented to it, but you won't be able to see if they're actively using it or not. So that tidy up process to make to reduce the risk of people having access they don't need, it becomes quite difficult. And to be fair, if applications, you stopped using applications, say you like I said, maybe you've got a backup system that needs permissions, and you've gone to a new one, you might still leave that application consented because you just gone to the new one. the risk is also is around supply chain attacks, and that if that organization gets compromised, yes, you're not using them today, you're using another one, but they may still have access to your environment. So it's also making sure you're doing tidy up afterwards as well.
Yeah. So do you see this as an actual sort of gap or a visibility issue? Because of those sort of tenant defaults. Do you think there are a lot of organizations that don't understand what is consented in their environment?
Yeah, that I see it a lot where it's been like I said, the permissions have been changed to stop just anyone being able to consent an application, and then it's just the task of running through what's already been consented to verify what's needed and what's not. The problem you've got is users might be using it for legitimate reasons, but you've got to now understand the risk of those apps, or try and standardize what types of apps are doing what, if that makes sense as well. So there's a lot of user I'm gonna say user work to get that right for your users, but also making sure that you're tidying up. So yeah, it's kind of I think we're at a point at the moment, maybe for new tenants, things like that now, the best practice is to turn the admin consent stuff on. So it's probably reasonable from the start, but there's probably a lot of legacy, or I don't know what you call it. I was going to say legacy, security debt, I suppose, in some way. The unknowns there. So it's just trying to work out how you can find that info easily without having to write scripts and things like that.
Okay, great. So could you just give us a sort of an overview of Defender for Cloud Apps?
Yeah, sure. So as we're kind of talking about earlier, Defender for Cloud Apps originally was a CASB, and still is a CASB solution. So being able to monitor SaaS applications and their authentications by integrating with the APIs, but also being able to do some DLP within some of them. Heavily DLP, some DLP capability with integrations with Purview around 365 and Azure. Being able to scan files and check the contents of it, but also looking for that impossible travel, things like that. The other part to it is being able to manage the sessions, so session control. So being able to block, copy, paste, print, download, upload sort of functionality within any application that is integrated, or potentially from third-party IDPs as well. Not as easy to sort of integrate, but potentially possible. Alongside that, you've got the cloud discovery, so be able to identify what SaaS applications users are using, with integration with Defender for endpoint, but also maybe with collecting logs from your secure web gateway or firewalls up into it to be able to identify those bits and be able to block. So that's kind of the main, or what used to be the main areas. We've now got an area called app governance. And the app governance part is where it can look at OAuth applications in Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, I think it is, and also Salesforce at the moment, with some new other ones coming. So being able to give you some lists within it of those SaaS applications with lots of detail about usage and things like that. So again, that's probably where we're gonna head next and dive into that bit more. But that's a quick sort of summary of Defender for Cloud Apps.
Okay, cool. Yeah, do you want to dive into that? Monitoring of OAuth applications.
Yeah. Okay, so as we kind of said, being able to monitor, and the challenge we've had is being able to identify overprivileged or highly privileged OAuth applications, but also their usage. So are they being used today, constantly, or are they just been used once and never used again, but that connection is still there? So as part of that, in effect, you get a dashboard when you go into app governance, and the first thing that you see is the overview page, and in effect it gives you some quick statistics, but shows you how many apps it's found, which ones are overprivileged or highly privileged, and then any incidents that have been created from the policies that you can create. Then when you move into the service you want to look at, so like Microsoft 365, Google, Salesforce, etc., they all have separate tabs if you've got them connected. It then shows you all the OAuth apps. It shows you when they were last modified. In effect, the table, I'll just do the table titles, but you got app name, app status, graph API access, permission type, so that's looking at delegated access or application, or mixed if it's got two. The app's origin, so if it's an external app or if it's an internal app, so maybe you're doing managed identities or search principles for authenticating with other apps you own. The consent type, so where it's admin or user. The publisher, so if they've been put a publisher name in there and they're verified. When it was last modified, when it was added to the tenant, and there's a few sort of other ones. So permission usage, the data usage, and the privilege level. So you can quite easily from this table start, filtering based on the types of those sort of those table tiles. So, first thing might be to look at the data usage to understand which applications are being used on a percentage side of things. But when you click into these, you then get a whole raft of more data about the applications. So if you open up one of the apps, you then get things like the whether the publisher's been verified, any certificates, community use, things like that. You then get data usage, so it then shows you what data might be accessed, specifically if it's talking about Graph, Office 365 APIs. In the last 30 days, it then shows you the most recent users. So it might be if it's an admin consented app, then all of your users are counted as users in there. But it will show you the top X users and their data from that side. So you can start seeing who's using it. So you can go and query why they're using this application or what they're using it for to understand whether you need to keep it. The next one is permissions. So when you go into permissions, it shows you what Graph API permissions it has. So where it's just profile and OpenID, so it's just doing authentication, or does it have access to send email on behalf of the user or as all users, etc. And then it's got a final tab about sensitive labels. So it will highlight to you if the application has accessed any data that has a sensitive label on it. So if you've got some highly sensitive information, you've got a highly confidential label as an example, you'd be able to identify if this application's been consuming it. Because it might be that data shouldn't be allowed to be consumed by third-party tools that you're not authorized, things like that. So straight away, you've got all this information in a table, and you can go in, can dive into the itself. There's loads of filters, so you can quite easily start to drop down your list in here quite easily, even if you just look down the list. To see which applications aren't being used and things like that, and start prioritizing which ones you can what's the quick wins and which ones you need to investigate with. So it's quite easy to then get to that point. As part of that, let's just check. Part of it you can also within the pool just disable the app as well. So then it basically unauthorizes it, stop its usage. So quite easily you can go, yeah, okay, don't need that, turn it off, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that is very, from a monitoring perspective, at least initially, getting that data easily, like in the format it is in the portal, in the Defender XDR portal, is key to even starting a tidy up, a cleanse of those applications.
Yeah, because, and I think that monitoring is probably the key part, isn't it? Because, I suppose from a configuration perspective, it might not be, really simple or trivial, but it is possible to get, who has consented to what, right? But, taking that a step further about, well, okay, and then the permissions that have been granted and whether somebody's actively using the app is the next level of monitoring, isn't it? The next stage of that. And then you're also talking about, well, actually, forget about, the simple, is somebody using it or not? This is like, what are these actual labeled items that are actually being accessed or not? Because when you're looking to remediate, you could say something like, "Oh, this OAuth app's got a load of permission to do X, Y, and Z, but maybe it's not actually doing it." If that makes sense, right? And then maybe there's another OAuth app that has less scary permissions, but maybe still can access certain silos of data, and maybe that's actually exfiltrating data from your organization, right? So there could be like a false positive there about what you should actually focus on first, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's not going to. It's still not going to be, I'm going to say, simple to understand why you should or shouldn't use apps and things like that, or which one should be disabled, because again, someone in an application might need the higher privileges for it, but it's just understanding. It's just understanding which ones, or at least identifying which ones are the risky ones. So at least then you can monitor them more, if that makes sense. Because at the moment, if you went to the apart from you creating the list yourself, again, working out which apps are doing what permissions, you're not going to know that from a quick view of Enter ID and things like that you're not going to be able to see that easily, if that makes sense. This is you could sort the list of OAuth apps by how much privilege they got, and just look at them and say, well, yes, the backup needs that one because it needs to access everything, because it needs to do the backup, which makes sense. It's legitimate. Again, there's still high risk there, because if they get compromised, I mean, you probably got bigger problems if they get compromised because they've got your backups, but they potentially got access to your system as well. But yeah, it's helping. It's still going to help guide or give you some steer about which one you should be looking at first. Or, like you said, the quick wins kind of thing might be legit, applications, things like that. But again, you need to look at the usage, because if they're not being used that much, then are they needed? If it's just 2 users and the whole business is consented, does that consent need to be reduced to those 2 users? Potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And this is an ongoing thing, right? New new OAuth / SaaS applications being integrated, new add-ons, plugins, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And updates and upgrades, right?
Yeah, I guess the difference though with new OAuth apps is that if you've got the admin consent part put on, that check is being done before they're put in, if that makes sense, or consented at least. Right, so there's been some due diligence, at least, hopefully, that the app's generally okay. Yes, it might still need it will still need monitoring in case supply chain attack, they get compromised, to see if there's more activity. But the issue potentially is less, because in theory you've already got that sanity check as they come in now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow, yeah, there's definitely a lot of really valuable information there, right? And I can imagine at scale in larger organization, there's probably tens or hundreds of applications here, right? That you're managing, monitoring, right?
Yeah, and I think, when we've showed it to some customers, I think they've kind of been, this is great. There's a lot of information here, but this feels like almost like one person's job to look after as well,
Yeah.
potentially, because again, depending on your organization, and again, it might take a while to get the list down to what you know. That's going to be the technical security debt, whatever you want to call it. Getting it to what you know should be valid. That's probably going to take some time, depending on again how many apps are in here. But once you're there, then it's probably just ticking over a little bit. So it's not less, it might not be as intensive, but also potentially there is some, alerting and policies in place to help maybe take some of that away from you as well.
Yeah, so do you think this is going to be a shock for some people? Do you think that there are people missing? Is this a whole new function of a security or IT team?
I've seen it. I've seen it when someone, like, in effect, where I was going with it previously was, they seen it, went, oh my god, this is great. There's loads of data here, but I need to check everything. This feels like another person's job that I've now got to do, kind of thing. At least initially, because it's like it's a lot of information. Microsoft have given us a lot of intel that we didn't have before, and now we're going, oh, I see problems. I need to fix it. That I didn't know about, sort of thing. So again, it's like I said, it's that technical debt or technical security debt, whatever you want to call it. That you see all this info that you need to tidy up because you've got risks everywhere.
And is information protection a required prerequisite? Is it worth using it without that? Because I'm just thinking for people that haven't got to that stage yet.
Yeah, no, you can use it for that. You can see the data usage, things like that. It's just you're not able to identify whether sensitive data is being consumed by it because it's not been labeled. So that's the only bit you kind of miss, but you still see top X users using how much data they're ingesting or using, pulling, or downloading. So it's still very valuable. It's just you might not know what that data is or what type of data that is.
You can't justify and say, hey, this is definitely PII data that's leaving the organization via this, because you can't do that due diligence on your OAuth apps, right? Like, let's say you've gone through a procurement process and you've gone, okay, this application does X, but actually it's doing Y, and they say that they don't, pull, that we don't have a PII processing agreement with this third party. It can help you to identify, those types of scenarios.
Yeah, and the other thing might be as well is that they might only use on a privilege level, a permission. They might say, oh, we need this permission just to do this one thing. And unfortunately, there's not enough granularity, and that is the case in some Graph API areas. Sometimes there's changes now with new permissions, so you can reduce least privileged sort of permissions. But there are some still that are a little bit high because they have to be at the moment. But they say, we're only using this to read this data. What this can do as well, as part of the monitoring and maybe the alerting and policies, is that you can monitor where they've over privileged. They got permissions, but they're not using them. So you can identify that actually, okay, maybe they need it on first launch to set something up, and then that's it. But it means you can potentially, I have to double check because I've not fully gone into this part, but you can then potentially, unconsent those permissions only, potentially. Might be an option. So you can reduce the permissions yourself, or the difficulty of contacting the SaaS service provider and going, you're not using this permission, I don't want it on my OAuth app, can you change it, sort of thing. it's probably going to be quite difficult, but at least you can monitor it. Because again, I think there are some policies, things like that, where you can see where activity changes in a OAuth app, and it's access to data.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable, and I just think it's going to help with from a security or an IT perspective, having those, let's call them discussions with like app owners, and procurers, at least you've got the information to have a two-sided, I'll call it discussion, but it's actually probably going to be an argument about whether that app should be in your environment or not, right? Because before it would just be like, oh well, it's requesting all these permissions, and then it could be hidden behind, well, our processing agreement says that they can't do that, so and we need it, so we're going to have it, right? Whereas if you can actually see some of this happening in real time, it's a lot, it's going to help you, with those types of discussions.
Yeah.
So what can we put alerting and sort of enforcement policies in and around this area?
Yeah, there are some base ones that you can do. So kind of what I was alluding to before, some of the policies, when you see something happening, the action can be to disable the OAuth app, which is quite not necessarily extreme, but kind of extreme, because it stops that app completely, which is good. But yeah, so there's a few in the portal. So if I just run through some of them, and they kind of make sense. So I'll go choose some going a different way. So app search Exchange content numerous times. That sounds quite interesting in itself. If content, if you've not seen it, do it before. Increasing app activity on OneDrive. So potentially viewing or accessing more data than it normally does.
Sorry, so that is from a rolling baseline of
It
normal
sounds like
usage.
it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
App sent Exchange email numerous times. So again, I'm assuming that's probably that it shouldn't be able to do it. And then now it is. Again, you can put apps in scope and out of scope. So it might be you've got a legitimate app, like, I can't think of anything that would send email, but maybe you've got an internal system that sends email via API. You can say, exclude that one from the policy, because everything else shouldn't be sending email, but might have the permission maybe. Increasing app activity on Exchange, so accessing Exchange. Access to sensitive data. So again, you can scope and the conditions. So again, choose apps what you want to do. Specify the locations. And also you can specify the labels that you want to target. So you could, like I said, you could have highly confidential as one that you want to be triggered, but not everything. Suspicious app with access to multiple M365 services. So that's just looking at unusual behavior, things like that happening in the environment against all or an app that's got access to SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, etc. Increase activity to SharePoint. Increase in app API calls to EWS. I believe that's Exchange Web Services. Yep. Increase in data usage by an overprivileged or highly privileged app. So, again, baselining, but identifying, where, apps are overprivileged or highly privileged, now doing more activity. So that's probably your highest risk sort of ones there. App created numerous inbox rules. That sounds like one you definitely need to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
New app with low consent rate. I'm guessing that is to identify apps that aren't being used. And unusual activity for an app with priority account consent. A priority account is an account with either high privileged or has been tagged in the portal for it. So that's the base ones. But you've got you can create your own ones in there. And you've got some for usage, so increase in users, so more users using an app. New app with high data usage. Overprivileged apps, new apps with non-graph APIs, new highly privileged app, new uncertified app, activities, access sensitive data, we've seen that one, and then a custom policy where you can build the permissions you want, kind of thing. So there's a lot there that you can do, and that's around Microsoft 365 ones, those ones. With other SaaS apps, you can do some other stuff, and it's at the moment, Google and Salesforce, where you can do that. But you can do something maybe not as that granular, because it depends on the APIs and that they provide. But yeah, I think that's a lot. That's a lot there to then start doing it. And again, you can just do alerting on it and not disable the app, but maybe with some of the other ones, you want to be able to disable the app if it goes a bit rogue, to say the least. So yeah, it's very powerful. Like I said, once you see it, it's almost like what have I stumbled across? I think.
Yeah, and I think it's like a real thing in people's environments, right? So it's like real data, showing them live what's going on, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about it from a security perspective, but can you imagine if you've got an OAuth app in here of a service you're paying for the organization and only 10 people are using it? Out of your 1,000 that you're paying for.
Yeah, that's
Things
true,
like
actually.
that.
Justifying, spend. Yeah. Well, we see that all
yeah.
the time, don't we?
Yeah, it's potential from that side. I mean, there obviously be statistics in that app as well, you would assume. But you can actually see, it from this side as well, potentially.
Nice. Thanks, Alan. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that was it. Again, we really only touched on one part of Defender for Cloud Apps. Briefly, obviously, talked about some other stuff, but yeah, that was it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that, Alan. That was really good.
Cool. I think the next episode is the news, isn't it, for March? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. This really helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you do have any specific feedback or suggestions for episodes, we have a link in our show notes that you can get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll speak to you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.